I came in this morning and it was something I had worked on Friday. I forgot where I was with the project I was in the middle of, and I'm like, ugh, I don't know. So I just asked Claude to do a PR review and to highlight the things that were still missing. So maybe an unconventional use for PR, but it was really
Yeah,
effective.
yeah. I love that one actually. Monday mornings with Claude. What was I doing Friday?
Yeah. Pour us each a cup of
Yeah.
coffee and let's get back to it. These last couple weeks have really started to show me the light and show me how much faster and more efficient and just, better of a developer I can be and how many interesting ideas can come from using Claude as well.
Hello, this is the Code and Cognition podcast. I am Scott, and today we are talking about Claude Code, Claude Code Skills, engineering your repo for more efficient development, and other topics in the vein of Claude Code. So I'm going to introduce my guests and co-hosts. We have Dustin, Lori, and Ben, who are all software engineers here at Olio Apps. And I'm going to hand it off to Dustin to talk a little bit about what he's going to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Scott. Glad to have Ben. I think this is his first appearance on one of these. So welcome. Yeah, so a lot's happened since the last time we did a recording. Anthropic has been dropping a lot of updates to their tool, Claude Code CLI, which is kind of the tool that we've adopted, the CLI tool that we've adopted at Olio to start with. Things are changing fast, mostly around the way the tools and the techniques that Anthropic has been giving us to manage context, right? How do we refine the prompts and the actual tokens that are going to the models? We've had, of course, the custom slash commands, subagents, and the latest one, Claude Code Skills. And I finally had an opportunity to work with skills for the first time. It was interesting because I had perceptions or ideas of what they were going to be good at prior to using them, and then after using them and doing a little deeper research to actually come up with good use cases and applications for the skills. For a brief overview of what skills are, it is leveraging kind of like this new concept that Anthropic's been using it left and right, but progressive disclosure, right? Like how do we more thoughtfully manage the tokens that we're putting into the window, right? That the models can see. When everything first started out, it was here is a Claude.md file and everything you want to know about your repo that you want Claude to know about your repo when it does work, you're going to put it in this Claude.md file, right? Your code styles, your commands, architectures, whatever. And that was the main memory mechanism, right? Without having to rewrite everything for every prompt. Just put it in a file and have it read it. And everything got loaded up front. Then we got the slash commands, which basically stash prompts, right, in these markdown files. And they're not used or they're not loaded until you actually do like slash do something, right? And then it says, okay, I've got a command for that. I'm going to load this prompt and go off from there. Subagents, kind of the next evolution of that is let's load a bunch of prompts into an agent and we're going to just tie off that context window in its own little environment. The agent will do something, right? It'll generate a bunch of tokens, do a bunch of work, report back. And then as soon as that report is made, it's going to discard everything, right? So your main top level context window is not polluted by all the other work that was generated by the subagent. Skills is a little bit different in that it's kind of it's not really a subagent. So let's set that aside. It's kind of an evolution of the command prompt, right? Like you can define things in this skill, right? Prompts, things that you want to do, techniques, instructions, whatever. But the agent has a mechanism to hook into those automatically, right? So you're doing a task and it will know, oh, I've been given this skill. Now I can decide when I want to load all of the context attached to that skill and then use it to accomplish a task. So very portable in the things you can write and kind of have ready to use without having to like explicitly invoke it like a subcommand. Any questions? Has anybody had an opportunity to use a skill yet or or really kind of dive into what it is at all, or have any questions?
I haven't had a chance to use it myself yet, but I'm curious about your real world experience and like how it's worked out.
Yeah. So originally, the first thought, and I think a lot of people are quick to jump to this too, is things for coding tasks, things that we just want to have knowledge of, like our linting rules, right? Or our patterns, our code styles that we kind of implement on a project level,
Yeah.
right? And we just want the agent to know about that, right? So that seems like a good place. Okay, rather than just bloating my Claude file, I'll just get in this skill, and whenever I mention linting or whenever it's doing a linting job, it'll just load that and then go on its way.
That makes sense because you don't need to think about linting the entire time you're coding. You just need to like context shift that into your brain when you're thinking about linting.
Yes.
This is probably the same thing with Claude Code.
Yeah. 100%. I think the thing that most people that I've read that have been playing with skills for the last few weeks since it came out is the agent doesn't reliably pull those in. Right. So what happens is, and I'll show a skill file. Actually, maybe I'll just do that right now. Let me figure out how to share. All right. So we're going to look at a skill file right here. Right. So this is a skill, and similar to the other implementations, right? It's just a markdown file, slightly different to where you have a command and the command name is the file name. These skills have their own directory, right? So this is called the shortcut story manager skill that I'm working on. So what happens? The agent wakes up, there's a skill registered, and the first thing it does is it just loads all these little front matter, YAML formatted front matters on this file. So it knows, hey, I've got a skill called shortcut story manager and a short description of what it does, right? And this is the hook. So whenever a prompt comes in, it's going to think, hey, do any of these descriptions match what I'm trying to do? And I don't have heuristics about like how often this actually works, enough to know that I wouldn't reliably depend on this to say every single time I want to lint a file, it would pull on my lint manager skill or my linting rules and do that. I know there's a lot of people who have built kind of workarounds using the hook API, right? Like every single time there's a prompt, there's a hook to say, hey, think about this, go through all your descriptions, make sure that, double check that there's no skills that you can use for this, and then continue. Kind of goes against I think the spirit of what skills you're supposed to do, but it's a solution. The initial implementation or usage of the skills wasn't super reliable, right? Like, how do we reliably implement a skill that's actually useful? I have kind of adopted the idea that kind of the slash command, like the custom prompts, right, are kind of like the primitive value for these tools, right? Like that's your most basic function, right? And it makes sense because that's the actual input to the prompt. And I like slash commands because they're invocable at any state, right? Like a subagent can invoke, a skill can invoke them. They're highly composable, right, within this agentic environment that we're working with, right? So rather than encoding actual rules into the skill itself, I started thinking about it more as like the skill is more of an SOP, right? Like a standard operating procedure, right? Like how is a task done rather than the rules about that particular task itself, right? It's for accomplishing something and not just rules about the thing, if that makes sense. So notice, so the skill I wrote is how do we use shortcut in this project I'm working on, and it's got an MCP server, but there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with it. And so rather than having to like rewrite prompts about, hey, this is how you get the stories, or this is how I want to handle epics, or create this ticket with these different tags, right? Like I wanted to build a skill to give the agent so it understands how me in the context of this project want stories to be managed, right? Or the things that I expect to happen. So looking at this skill that we have, it's more about, rules around this is how you create a story classification. Is it new code, DevOps, kind of what is it about? Rules about the level of detail we want in the ticket, and then how to template it, right? What should the ticket actually look like? So these are all like explicitly detailed out in this skill. And you notice that it actually references other documents. So that's the cool thing about skills is you actually are able to encode a lot more specific details, right? In these files that are only read when the use case requires it. So use this template versus this template. It understands when it needs to load this in. So that's just the next layer in this progressive disclosure pattern that it uses to load context. So long story short, this rather than just defining some stuff about the rules, like this is basically like a fairly detailed instruction set for how I want tickets to be managed when I'm using the agent in this particular project, and kind of what that looks like in usage. All right, we're going to check out the shortcut skill that I wrote. List all shortcut tickets that are in development. We'll say list all of. So what we're expecting to see is loading. We might have to skip the demo because this is not actually. No, it's working. Those are the ones, but it's not loading the actual skill, which is the frustrating thing that I was just literally talking about.
Well, that's okay. This is like real world.
Yeah,
Claude
so
Code's not using the skill.
use the shortcut skill to get all of my in development, in dev tickets. Yeah. Well, see, that's an interesting question, because I mean, and this kind of goes to like the need of when do you actually need a skill to do this stuff. So it didn't invoke it here.
It does seem like it's talking to shortcut.
It does, because it's got the MCP loaded in, right? It's got the shortcut MCP loaded in. So it knew enough to do this by itself, right? And then here, right, we got a real similar response when it loaded the ticket, right? Or when it retrieved the tickets here, or when it loaded the skill, excuse me. So that's the same. The issue I would think would be when you're doing more complex stuff, right? Like write a ticket to the Claude Epic for fixing the shortcut skill. Right, we'll see if it actually, yeah, see, it's loading in the template, right? So at this point, it's understanding kind of instructions that I have written for how to write tickets.
Cool. It seemed like that was more what the skill was about, right? The writing of tickets more than like the fetching.
Yeah. So, and maybe that was something that I need to go back and write, right? When you're reading tickets, you also need to invoke this skill. Maybe it said, I can do this by myself without having to invoke the skill. It's very powerful, right? Because this is exactly what I want to do, right? Like it knew that I wanted the most current sprint. It knew that I had this, I've got all these labels mapped out, and it knows how to kind of intelligently add different labels and tags based on instructions that I've encoded. So like it works, and when it works, it's great. But like we saw earlier, it's can be a little bit unreliable and when it actually runs, which is why some, there's workarounds as far as like the hooks and tricks to invoking it or having to even manually, explicitly invoke it. I think in my agent or I've got a slash command that says, load this skill before you do anything. Right. And that's embedded into a slash command to explicitly load it. So super powerful. I would be surprised if this gets tightened up a little bit on Claude's side, but anyways, a ton of potential.
All right. Well, we also have Ben here today, who's been working on a personal project recently and using Claude Code there.
Yeah, I've been playing around with Claude Code for the last couple of weeks really seriously. Before then, kind of just here and there, but then the last couple of weeks, I've been digging into it quite a bit. So the first thing I'll show you, I have to be judicious about what I'm showing here, but I did recently spend a good deal of time, I won't show us, a good deal of time with Claude having conversations about how we can improve its abilities within the code base of the project that I'm working on. I don't want to share any of the sensitive information within this project, but I can show kind of overarchingly like what Claude and I were able to build together, which has helped it become quite a lot more efficient. So Dustin had mentioned before slash commands, and here are just like quick sort of summaries of these slash commands that are really quite useful, right? Like when I want to commit, it knows the format of my commit message. It can push up for me. It can do all of these things. It can run tests only on the affected files. It can create PRs. There is a template in there for the way we write our PR messages. And so it can go in, read that template, look over the changes that have been made within this PR, what would be merged into the target branch, and it can summarize all of that. And it does a really good job of that. It can even do code reviews. And I've been playing a bit more with having it do code reviews on my code. I even ran it on a colleague's code today who had made a PR that made sort of the same change in like 160 tests. And so, as a human, I'm going to read through those 160 tests and eventually my eyes are going to glaze over and I'm probably going to miss some things. So I had Claude read through every single one of those changes and summarize suggestions and errors, anything like that. And it was really useful. It even spit out, hey, you should approve this, but with comments, or you should require changes or whatever. So all of that is really interesting. And then the other thing, the other slash command is this fix docs command. So as your code base changes, the documentation that Claude is writing about the code to optimize itself will also need to change. So periodically, you can either manually run this fix docs command, which is going to then, once again, audit your code base and see if like the conventions and whatever is documented within Claude's documentation is still accurate. I had also put, or had Claude put, a very light version of that within the create PR slash command. So every time we create a PR, it's really mostly just looking at the changes and saying, well, does this align with what I have said the conventions in this code base are? And if we do the fix docs one, it's a bit more thorough. So I did the slash commands, I also had Claude run through and, looking through our code base, well, I guess as I mentioned, document some of like our patterns and conventions and everything within there. We had done a very light version of this initially when we started using Claude Code in the code base. But, through a series of conversations, really, I mean, it was all done with just natural language with a dialogue. I asked Claude Code, well, what's a way that we can do this that is beneficial for you, but also modular enough that humans can go in and say, like it's not just one, because that's what it tried to do at first, was create a single like 4,000 line file with all the documentation for the entire code base. But instead, we work together to break it out into modular chunks. So there is, one file for just what are the conventions in our DAOs on the back end, another one for what are our Redux conventions on the front end, things like that. And then I ran an A/B test between the two. So I gave it a discrete task, a full stack task of basically getting an entity from the database, making a list out of it, sending it to the front end with pagination, and creating the Redux and components and everything to display that list. And I asked it to use the old documentation first, and I did this in two separate Claude Code contexts, and not actually implement the task, but make a plan for it. So understand the context and what other code is relevant to kind of influence the way that this is built. And then I had it do it again in a new context with the new documentation. And what it found, then I had it analyze the two. It found a 76% reduction in total token usage. It was 33% more efficient, 38% less time searching, and 70% fewer files read. I think all of us are relatively new to Claude Code, like, since its outset. And then, as Dustin pointed out, a lot of these tools are changing, and we have new tools coming all the time. So we're all kind of trying to figure out how to use this in an efficient way and an effective way. But I think a big part of the game is going to be figuring out sort of context management and token conservation, right? Because tokens really end up equating to how much this costs your company or you as an individual.
Not only that, but like how accurate and directly it's solving the task versus, hallucination creeps in when you have like too much in the context, in my experience.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think any of us who have used Claude Code or Claude or ChatGPT or anything to help with coding, we've all seen it fail. We've all seen the hallucinations. I will quickly also just show a personal project that I've been working on. So the basics of this is a game that accompanies the Great British Bake Off. And so I have some friends, we like the Bake Off, and we watch it once a week or once every other week. And in between, we come up with bets for what's going to happen. So I built this originally about 2 years ago. I built all the database in MongoDB because there was a technology I wanted to learn at the time. Dusting this off about a week ago, I realized that was no longer the technology that I wanted to use. Throughout the app, there are about maybe 30 endpoints with database interaction. And I brought Claude Code in and I said, here's where my controllers live, basically. Figure out the rest. I want to remove MongoDB. I want to add Prisma and Postgres. And I want you to just figure out how to replace it in every instance. It made a couple of mistakes, but overall, within about 10, 15 minutes, I had almost entirely working app once again. And so it read through all of my schemas, understood what the entities were, replaced everything, replaced all the invocations of like any sort of database interaction. So pretty amazing. And that's something I would classify as like pretty high context. So it can sometimes surprise you what it's able to do, but it is also surprising when it fails. A couple other cool things that happened in my sort of like rebirthing of this project. I had a very junky dashboard on here that had like super limited information. And so I just told it, I want a better dashboard. I want something that looks cool. Use, data visualization library if you'd like, whatever. I really left a lot of the creativity and all of the implementation up to Claude Code. And it was able to, implement some pretty interesting stuff here with, my balance history as I'm going through and betting on episodes. As you can see, this user is not doing so well. All the bets that I currently have going, these are all pending bets that I have proposed and other people have not yet accepted. It also implemented drag and drop. I previously had just like up and down arrows for rankings, and it implemented drag and drop in about 2 minutes, I would say. So pretty cool stuff. I mean, I I have been bringing Claude and Claude Code into my workflow over the last couple of years, little by little, but these last couple weeks have really started to show me the light and show me how much faster and more efficient and just, better of a developer I can be and how many interesting ideas can come from using Claude as well.
Yeah, did you use it during the recent hackathon?
I sure did. And honestly, that was the thing that really got me excited because what we ended up doing, we built a top-down game in the style of Hotline Miami or the original Grand Theft Auto games. And there were three of us. And using Claude Code, the three of us, in the span of about 6 hours, built an entire game without I don't think any of us opened VS Code at all, like not once. Everything was just looking at the browser and interacting with the command line and talking with Cloud Code and giving it feedback about what's working and what isn't. And that was it. Like we didn't actually implement the code ourselves. We used Phaser.js as our sort of like game physics library. I don't know Phaser.js. I didn't learn it. I didn't read the docs. I just talked with Claude Code and natural language, and it was able to make a fairly convincing game.
That's amazing.
It was fun.
Cool. Well, do we have any other thoughts or things we want to talk about? Dustin, any reactions, or Lori?
Dustin, I had one other question for you. I was curious, just in your poking around with Claude Code Skills, what other real world scenarios people have found it helpful with, or just in your like playing around with it, if there was anything else you had come across with what people are using it for.
So, good question. And the answer is really kind of like whatever you can think of, it can do. I know when Anthropic dropped it, they had a bunch of examples already of like document manipulation, right? Like they've got skills for Excel sheets, PDFs, right? Rules around how do you read PDFs, how do you size them, all that stuff. Excel, I mean, you could do a billion different things with Excel sheets, right? Whatever task you were tuning it for could be wrapped in a skill. On the development side, through the CLI tool, different use cases, for every project, but Git work trees, right? And we're going to be hearing more and more about Git work trees. It's going to be pretty standard. I think in the next couple of years, everybody's going to be using them as an everyday part of their workflow. But there's a couple examples of skills that create work tree orchestration, right? And managing multiple work trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a big stuff like that, right? Like, so higher order orchestrations of processes that are encapsulated in those slash commands or subagents, depending on the use case.
Yeah.
That's the other big one that I've seen real value for
Yeah.
that we're going to explore pretty soon.
Yeah. Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, that's helpful. And Ben, I would be curious to see what types of PRs have you used Claude Code to review so far? I'm curious how that workflow has looked.
Yeah, not too many. I've really only done it a couple of times. I had it review a PR that I actually wasn't even done with. I'll be honest, what happened was I came in this morning and it was something I had worked on Friday. And, just kind of in the haze of the morning and the intervening time, I forgot where I was with the project I was in the middle of. And I'm like, ugh, I don't know. So I just asked Claude to do a PR review and to highlight the things that were still missing, in terms of getting to the end of the ticket. So maybe an unconventional use for PR, but it was really
Yeah.
effective because it said, hey, you're missing that button,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. I love that one actually. Monday mornings with Claude. What was I doing Friday?
yeah. Pour us each a cup of
Yeah.
coffee and let's get back to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was curious about that because so far I haven't been on my current project for too long, but on the last project that we were on, a mobile app, we were a little reticent to use Claude for reviewing, other than being sort of like an assisting hand, because we wanted to really validate ourselves. And, Claude, even with knowing the parameters and like the metrics of a project, it can very much hallucinate. in those scenarios. So yeah, I'm really curious what that workflow could look like moving forward with PR reviews. But yeah, just curious with your little bit of experience so far.
It's a really interesting question, I think, because not only do you run the risk of it hallucinating or misunderstanding the kinds of conventions or standards that you want to have on the team, you also run the risk of kind of forgetting how to do this stuff yourself in general. I mean, whether it's having Claude implement the work, or having Claude review the work, but especially if you're doing both, if Claude's doing everything and you stop reviewing it, you're not exposing yourself to code at all. And maybe there will come a day where that's okay and Claude will be efficient enough to be able to just handle the whole show by itself, but I do worry a little bit about like my skills atrophying as I lean on this like very powerful tool more and more.
I think at that point, you just develop the new skill, right? Of how do I engineer the tool that's writing and managing my code, right? Like it's a shift up the ladder rather than, you know, atrophying something else. I think the review question to me is interesting for a number of different reasons, right? Like number one, to me, like at what point is the review good enough, right? Because we make judgment calls all the time about when the code is good enough to be actually merged, right, and accepted. And we weigh those decisions based on a number of factors, right? Like, does it meet coding conventions? Does it have these different standards? But we all know it can, if you're in a time crunch, maybe you sacrifice coverage for something else, or you're like, okay, this naming, I'm just gonna let slide for whatever reason, that you do. The thing about Claude with reviews though is like you tell Claude to review a perfect PR, it's going to find something wrong with it, right? So how do you get out of that endless loop of just constant refinement just for the sake of running tokens through the machine, right?
So today you still need the human judgment. You're like, okay, I see that you've listed these things, but these are all things I don't care about. So I'm just going to hit merge now.
Right. Right. So what are those mechanisms for classifying, you know, trivial versus minor versus major review issues, right? And who actually decides when to let them through, right? Like what does that infrastructure looks like?
Some of the things like the naming conventions or like coding conventions, like mechanical stuff, that would be a cool use of Claude Code to just go ahead and make that change instead of like asking the developer to fix it. It'd be faster to just have the LLM just mechanically fix the naming conventions and such.
Scott, that ties in. We talked earlier about future episodes, right? And moving on to the next phase, which is that we're talking about spec-driven development, right? That's kind of the holy grail of this whole venture is like, how do you actually produce, production ready work, right? How do you complete the loop from design, implementation, testing, review to publish, right? And the movement is, towards spec-driven development. We'll talk about that, but the review part of that is super important, right? And then like, where does that tie into accepting work, right, generated from specs? So I think, Lori, your questions about like review and how that works are going to get answered pretty quickly, right, as we continue to grow the toolkit around Claude.
Yeah. Yeah, I think right now I'm a little, like I said, I'm a little resident to let Claude take over too much with PR reviews versus it being, a helping hand with validation. I think that's highly valuable. But yeah, it is the tools continue to rapidly change. So yeah, I'll be curious even a few months from now what that looks like.
All right, cool. Well, maybe we can wrap it up here. It looks like we have some future topics, so spec-driven development and maybe Git work tree orchestration. I'm curious to hear about that too. And Ben, I want to get together with your team and talk about your hackathon project. So lots more to discuss in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.